segment 5, last segment. What is to be done? I quote you to yourself. You were writing in the Telegraph in March 2008. I'm sure you know what's coming because you've got to live this one down. I'm for Obama. You wrote those words. I'm for Obama. As a conservative and as a friend of America, I see huge attractions in an Obama presidency. Close quote. Explain yourself.
All right. First of all, it was very difficult to muster much enthusiasm for the Republican Party by 2008. This was a party which, at its best, had done extraordinary things for freedom and democracy in this country, the party of Reagan, the party of the contract with America. But by the time of the 2008 presidential election, it had gone in a different direction. It had become a party of external protectionism and tariffs, a party that was striking down states' rights, a party that had massively expanded the federal government, the budget deficit, a party that had become...
States' rights would be what? The No Child Left Behind Act?
In the field of education, in the field of euthanasia, in the field of same-sex unions. I mean, wherever you stand on those issues, surely they are things that you can negotiate for yourself through your own democratic mechanisms and procedures state by state. It is crazy for Washington to be stepping in and telling
so George W. Bush and Tom DeLuise spent too much money.
All of that. And then when you thought it couldn't get any worse, they became a party of bailouts and nationalizations. It was very difficult by the end of 2008 to feel much enthusiasm for them. Barack Obama seemed to me someone who would make the US more popular, would provoke a certain amount of soul-searching from some of the more knee-jerk anti-Americans. It would cause them to re-examine their prejudices, which it did, actually. Let's be fair about that. I had no idea then that the federal state would be 30% bigger now than it was then.
I was about to say, you've set me up to feel merciful, but you still have to make your confession.
He campaigned, it seems an eternity ago, on a promise of tax cuts.
Right.
To put it as neutrally as possible, that isn't what's happened.
So when did you recognize that this man, that there was this was not going the way you had hoped or expected?
He was dealt a bad hand with the financial crisis, but he did not play it as I had hoped he would. He'd set himself up as a bipartisan figure. You know, he came to national attention in the first place with that speech about not slicing and dicing and having red states and blue states. He had positioned himself, it seemed to me, as somebody who could do what a president is meant to do, which is to be above party. When people said of him, he's all things to all men, I would say, well, you know, where is the dishonor in that? The phrase comes from, as you know, from 1 Corinthians. Paul says, I'll come as a Jew to the Jew, as a Greek to the Greeks. That's what a president's meant to do.
I excuse you, but only on grounds of youth, Daniel. You've made your one mistake that Americans will permit you. Now, to prevent the Europeanization of America, you have to identify the reasons for it, right? So what is the political or even the psychological mechanism? You have just laid out briefly on this program in detail in this book why it would be a terrible mistake for the United States to copy Europe with regard to immigration or healthcare or the economy or welfare or anything else. And yet here we are doing it. So what's the impulse? Why? Why does Barack Obama want this country to look more European?
By and large, politicians are more warm about expansions of state power than the rest of us. And the reason why politicians like an expansion of state power is because they personally stand to benefit. I don't mean that. I don't mean to imply that they're corrupt or anything like that. It's just that they think they have the answers. We all do. It's natural to think that, and therefore you tend to be more impatient with constraints on your own power than you are on somebody else's. But the great thing about this country is that because of the system your founders designed, you still have the ability to control them.
Right. Okay, so the impulse is just, what it comes down to really is the usual self-seeking impulse of the priestly caste.
Right, but people are almost always wiser than their leaders. I mean, I was really struck this week. I left France and it was on strike, as usual, because Sarkozy is raising the retirement age to 31 or something. And people were marching with banners saying, let's block the economy and strike till you retire. Which is not going to be very long under the current system. And then you arrive here, and there are crowds on the street with banners saying, don't tread on me, taxed enough already, who is John Galt? You know, guess which country is growing faster?
God bless America. So, in The New Road to Serfdom, you write, let me close with a heartfelt imprecation. Honor the genius of your founders, preserve the freedom of your nation. To whom do you address that? Republican leaders, Rush Limbaugh listeners, Sarah Palin? Whom? Just what segment? Who do you expect to be able to stand up and change things?
This is addressed to everybody. Hayek addressed the original road to serfdom famously to socialists in all parties. He had also perceived the way in which political leaders tend to be keener on the centralization of power than the rest of us. There's a wonderful line of Edmund Burke. He was in his reflections on the French Revolution, talking about the way in which people are wiser than the chattering classes, where he said, because half a dozen crickets concealed beneath a fern make the field ring with their importunate chink, while thousands of great cattle chew the cud in the shade of the great British oak and are silent, pray do not imagine that those who make all the noise are the only inhabitants of the field. In this country, as in mine, as everywhere else, people are wiser than their leaders. I will always repose my trust in the oxen rather than the grasshoppers, and I think you're going to be imposing yourself on the grasshoppers in a couple of weeks' time.
Two views of America at this moment. One is economist Thomas Sowell. Quote, to follow Rome, one of the greatest civilizations of all time as it degenerated and fractured, is especially painful in view of the parallels to what is happening in America in our own times. Historian Paul Ray, the political moment in which we live is a moment of great, great hope. The Obama administration is a gift to the friends of liberty. Decline and fall, rebirth and liberty. What's your assessment?
The decline and fall of Rome happened because it became bureaucratized, taxed, centralized. It's what brings a civilization down in the end. Same thing happened to the Mings, to the Moguls, to the Ottomans. The genius of the West was pluralism, variety, the dispersal of power, personal enterprise and freedom. And that reached its highest incarnation in the old courthouse in Philadelphia, which is why when I see this country making the same mistakes that the rest of the world has done, going down this road towards federal czars, more regulation, higher taxes, when I see power shifting from the 50 states to Washington, from the elected representative to the federal bureaucrat, from the state, from the citizen to the state, as a British conservative who likes to think of this country as being a repository for our traditional concepts of British freedom, that really pains me. You deserve better as a people, and the world deserves better.
Penultimate question. The frontispiece of The New Road to Serfdom comes from Thomas Paine's famous pamphlet, Common Sense, 1776, quote, the cause of America is in great measure the cause of all mankind, close quote. Why did you choose that?
Like him, I am a British subject interested and involved in the survival and success of American freedom. You will perhaps allow me a measure of additional pride as a British conservative when I look at the structures of this country, when I say that they were not dreamed up in a vacuum. If you go back and you look at what the Patriot leaders were arguing at the time, they didn't see themselves as revolutionaries. They saw themselves as conservatives. As far as they were concerned, all they were asserting was what they had always assumed to be their birthright as Englishmen. Mm-hmm. And that's why, I don't think I'm unusual, actually, among my countrymen in this regard. When I look at the success of this country, it's like a man looking at the success of a wealthy nephew who may have become wealthier than him, and you sometimes have to tease him a little bit, but secretly you're bursting with pride because you can see that it's the same ideology.
Final question. Our interview will air just a few days before the election. If you could address one sentence to Americans to ponder just before going into the voting booth, what would you say, Daniel?
Be aware of how lucky you are, how unique you are. This country has been made different from the rest of the world because of a sublime set of institutions that were designed by exceptional men. If one generation of leaders presumes to strike down those institutions in the name of short-term contingency, it will make your country less American, by which I mean less prosperous, less democratic, less free.
Daniel Hannan, author of The New Road to Serfdom, A Letter of Warning to America. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution. Thank you.